Okay, so this is the second video for the Porsche Cayenne or the Volkswagen Touareg drive shaft. Okay, so as you can see here, drive shaft is out. And again, just to point out, the nothing wrong with the actual drive shaft here. It's just this bearing that sits in the middle. You can see, bearing again is fine. No problem with the bearing. It's literally should have a rubber kind of seal in here, and the rubber's worn away, and that's why you get this knocking noise in the car. Okay, so myself, I replaced the whole drive shaft because it wasn't too much extra, and I couldn't be bothered with the hassle of changing this bearing. So just to kind of recap the process, this center bearing is held in on the car with this bracket underneath. So there was 16mm screws, and these two 13mm screws that bolt onto the bracket itself and the bearing. Okay, this is the front of the car. So you have three 18mm, this is, I'm talking about a 3.2 V6 2005 Cayenne here. So here we had three 18mm screws bolting through this kind of rubber bearing bit to the car, the front of the car, and then the rear over here with a hex screws, and they bolt to the rear of the car. Okay, so center section here, no problem getting these screws off. This is the bracket. Again, I got a replacement bracket that came with the the drive shaft. No problem taking this off. No problem taking the bolts out from the front. So there's 6 bolts here. No problem actually taking the bolts out of the back. But an absolute nightmare releasing that from the car. So if we have a quick look at that, no reason at all why. I mean, it's not rusted or anything. This actually bolts into the back. But researching a bit and speaking to a couple of people, it appears that's a common problem, is actually getting this to release from the car. You hammered it, couldn't get it to release. So a little tip here, it's not probably the ideal way of doing it, but speaking, like I say, with a couple of people, the only way that they were able to release it is literally bolt the front back in, leave that all bolted up, loosen the bolts at the back here, the 6 bolts, and then you can just rock the car, drive it forwards and backwards. Sometimes that will release this from the back of the car. What I actually had to do on this car was completely remove the 6 bolts and be very, very careful. And I literally just had to drive it down the road, turn it around, drive it back. Don't drive it too far, because if it does come apart, you've got no drive to the car. So drove it to the end of my driveway, drove it back, and eventually, after a little bit of driving, it released itself. Okay, then I had to push the car to a safe area, and that's when I put the new shaft in. Okay, so the other thing to mention with the replacement that I did was taking this shaft out is not a problem, because it moves in the middle here. You've got a lot of movement. Okay, you can see it move, so you can flex it around. It actually also squishes in and out here slightly, so you can get that out of the car no problem with a little bit of maneuvering. However, what I found with the replacement shaft is getting it into the car was not an easy task. So this front area here, it just slots over a bar at the front of the car. This sits in between. Okay, so you've got to get that in. And what I found, I had to literally take this thing in and out a few times to get it to move. and to fit to the car. Now, I don't know if the new one was very slightly longer. I mean, I put them side by side before putting it in, and they seemed exactly the same. But basically, the bar that this sits in, I had a few mil here that I just physically couldn't get into the car. Eventually, what I had to do was put the front end in, bolt it up so it was nice and tight here, just loosely put the center section in, and then this back section, I think it also depends on the model of the car. You sometimes have to remove some of the exhaust brackets. On the 3.2 V6 Cayenne, I didn't need to do that. But this rear section here, what I had to do is put it kind of in place, and there's a cross member under the car, and so it just meant that this really, you just couldn't physically push it up with your hand. So I left it for a little bit, had to think about it. What I managed to do in the end is put this area underneath the car. I got a second jack, and I jacked this up slightly, and gradually that would go in, yeah, without damaging anything. Once it was in, there was a bit of movement around there, it was no problem. So kind of lined it up, turned it around, got it so it lined up some of these holes, so your 6 holes all lined up there. And then after that, it was a case of just bolting it in. The only other bit of hassle there is if I was doing it on this trolley jack here, I had to keep dropping the car down, moving it forward or backwards very slightly, just so you would turn the drive shaft so you could get to all of the bolts, all of the 6 bolts around it. Okay, so that was really the only bit of hassle. Having known that and knowing the way to do it now, it's a quick and easy job. Okay, so those are the pain points. The pain point really, like I say, was always this back area. Nothing in the middle, nothing at the front. That was really dead easy to do. It was literally removing that, and like I say, the tip was to you know, release those bolts and drive it a bit, and it eventually kind of split itself, and then putting it back into the car, just couldn't physically do it. So second jack, have a second jack, and then just put that under this back area down here, and eventually just jack it up, and it will pop nicely into the car. Okay, so yeah, overall not a bad job. Didn't need any specific tools. The only kind of tool that probably most people don't have in their toolkit was one of these splined sockets. Yeah, that was for the rear bolts here. They're in the car now, so I can't actually show you those. And yep, I can't remember what size that was. I think I mentioned it in the first video. But yeah, those are the things you kind of need. And like I say, other than that, it was a 13mm socket, an 18mm, a 16mm, and then a kind of open-ended spanner for this side, just to hold the nuts in place while you're undoing the bolts. But other than that, yeah, probably a couple-hour job, to be honest, so nothing major. Good luck with that, and leave some comments if you think the video is helpful.